Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening to everyone that's joining us. Again, depending on where you're connecting from, we we typically do have a bit of a kind of global audience for these events, and I think with today's topic, that carries even more weight. Um, we're going to give it a couple of minutes while others join. Particularly, again, we've got one of our panelists who's just sorting out some connection issues, but he'll be with us as soon as he can. And then we'll dive into today's theme and just kind of get started. I'll do some introductions and kind of some logistics while we set everything up. My name is Juan. I'm the CEO and co-founder at Finboot. We are the host for today. We're a technology company that delivers digital traceability and shared record-keeping solutions to enterprise customers across sectors. Hi, Marco. There you go.
Hello, everyone.
So yeah, again, today I have the pleasure and the privilege to be accompanied by two top-notch supply chain experts. We've got Marco Kovacevic and Sarah Latty of the Digital Supply Chain Institute. The DSCI is an organization that focuses on studying and monitoring the evolution of enterprise supply chains in the context of the digital economy, and that creates practical applications and best practices for supply chain management. Specifically today, we're going to be discussing one of their recent studies on geopolitics and geoeconomics reshaping the supply chain. If you've signed up to the event, via email, you're going to be receiving a copy of the full paper. But in case you haven't, or in case some of you are joining us live on the streams on LinkedIn or YouTube, the team backstage is going to share a link that you can use to download that full paper. Now, there you go. There's the link in the comments section. So before we jump in, I will ask Sarah and Marco to introduce each other. So, Sarah.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. My name is Sarah Latty. I'm the Director of Operations and Program Management for the Digital Supply Chain Institute.
And Marco, over to you.
Thank you, Juan. I would also like to thank Finboot for being an active and committed member of Digital Supply Chain Institute. As Juan shared, my name is Marco Kovacevic, and I'm the Managing Director of Digital Supply Chain Institute. Juan, back to you.
Thank you. Thank you both for joining us today. This is actually a topic that has spiked quite a lot of interest in our audience. So I'm really glad that we get a chance to deep dive and kind of look into or provide a bit more insights behind that initial paper. So today we're going to split the session kind of in two parts. So we're going to start with a presentation from Sarah, who will give us kind of like an initial view to set the scene and summarize some of the key points of that paper. And then we'll follow that up with a panel discussion, right? Where I'll be asking questions to both Sarah and Marco. We've got a couple of questions prepared, but honestly, we mostly want to try to address the audience questions, right? So make sure that at any time already you can start kind of popping in some of your questions and queries in the comment section. And we'll make sure that we address as many as we can with the time that we have today, right? But yeah, without further delay, Sarah, the floor is yours to kick off with the presentation.
Yeah, sure. Give me just 1 minute to share my screen and I'll get us started.
Just to share with you until Sarah opens up the presentation, this is actually an ongoing research which Sarah has been leading globally with the team in DSCI. It's focused really on extended learnings across industries and across continents, and actually focusing on trying to find the elements which are horizontal elements with supply chain challenges, no matter of the industry and no matter of the geography. So in that sense, we wanted to help the leaders within supply chain and as well supply chain professionals in order to see and understand the three key challenges everybody is facing. So this is what Sarah will bring you through. What I would like also to state before she takes the lead, her team and her, under her leadership, really deep dive into it, and they keep on doing it across the time. So this is something which is an ongoing research for Digital Supply Chain Institute, because of the reasons we have seen, especially in the last 3 years, that the circumstances on global markets and in global economy are changing rapidly. So nobody can say today, you know, these are the things which implicates us, and they will implicate us for 100 years more. So the things are fast moving in that sense, and DSCI committed to its membership and also to the broader supply chain global community that we will keep on following what are the three key trends always and adjust them towards the circumstances we are finding across the global markets. So Sarah, back to you to bring the audience into the research agenda.
Okay, sure. I will.
We had it on the screen, but it disappeared for some reason.
Okay.
Sometimes digital technology helps us, sometimes digital technology takes the toll, right?
We'll cover some of that today as well, right? So sometimes there are challenges around everything, right?
True. And I think especially with the digital transformation and technology, what we have seen around the globe especially is there are always great plans and great strategies, but without doing the first steps and then, let's say, testing around in the area of putting the strategy into action as soon as possible, people don't adjust and don't learn what are the pitfalls which we cannot see along the way, especially with customer service and customer products within the supply chain arena. So in that sense, you know, this will also touch base on it. So Sarah, I see the screen is up, and back to you.
Okay, perfect. So I'll get us started then. So in the past, business leaders were able to execute their supply chain operations really without having to worry about any geopolitical or geoeconomic constraints. The global economies and the policies in place really promoted an environment for global trade. However, this environment has really changed. The international commitment to trade liberalization that we used to see has really been greatly reduced, and in some cases even eliminated. So because of this, many leaders are now worried about the impact that these geopolitical and geoeconomic factors will have on companies' operations going forward. And it's really been forcing leaders to consider alternate choices to mitigate operational and financial risks when operating their supply chain. So the three factors of change that we'll focus on today are the rise in deglobalization, the rise in protectionism, and then the climate change commitment. So we'll start first with the rise in deglobalization that has been highlighted by a variety of factors. And then we'll start with COVID-19. So COVID brought to light the fragility of supply chains, and now a heavy reliance on imports and foreign producers is oftentimes seen as a source of risk. There's really now a growing preference for less reliance on imports and expanding indigenous sources of supply, called supply chain sovereignty. There also were disagreements that arose because of Russia's invasion of Ukraine within the United Nations Security Council on how to end this dispute. And there were disagreements between President Biden and President Zelensky. And this drew concern as people were concerned that the more divided the UN became, the more fragmented the world would become. Policies are beginning to reflect this shift as well. For example, Biden's new executive order that pushes for greater domestic production, an increased stockpile of goods, and an American manufacturing base and workforce. So really, supply chains require both technology and trust to work, but this trust is really what's decreasing. The IMF has stated that global economic fragmentation would slow the pace of innovation and hinder its ability to tackle any challenges such as another pandemic or climate change, and really linking this fragmentation to a key factor of reform at the multilateral development banks. They've also established, or they've gone as far as to establish a list of potential solutions if the fragmentation continues to progress in a recently published article on their website. Next, we'll cover the rise in protectionism. So protectionist policies are on the rise, as shown by the U.S. and China trade war, the United States increasing tariffs on imports from the UAE, and Biden's latest executive order. In addition, both the United States and the EU have seen carbon border taxes gain momentum. And these new regulations would support domestic manufacturing by taking away the competitive advantage that countries with lax regulations typically have had in the past, such as India, China, or Russia. Japan's ministers recently stated that G7 countries should work to counteract the economic coercion that China typically implements against its trading partners, which is likely to draw an adverse reaction from China. These increasing concerns over supply chain security are going to begin to drive an uncomfortable shift in U.S. foreign policy. As countries begin to implement these policies, the general support for and cooperation and trade with these other countries typically declines, therefore increasing the likelihood for protectionism in both locations. And if you look on this graph here, you'll see this is a Google trend of the words protectionism and trade barriers. So you'll see they follow a very similar path over time. So next we'll cover the climate change commitment. So not only will policies related to climate change impact trade, but also the actual physical impacts of climate change will impact trade. So starting with the policies, both the United States, the EU, and many other countries have begun to implement a few, and we'll look at the Inflation Reduction Act in the United States. We also have the Net Zero Industry Act in Europe, which is designed to increase their manufacturing of clean technologies to help them prepare for the upcoming clean energy transition. In May of 2023, actually, for the first time ever, wind and solar power generated more energy than fossil fuels in the EU, which shows that the efforts that they're putting in are really beginning to work, and they're really preparing for this shift. We're also already beginning to see the physical impacts of climate change impact trade, such as the drought that's happening in the Panama Canal. The OECD predicts that maritime shipping, which is about 80% of global trade by volume, will be impacted by extreme weather. And they expect this to decrease all productivity factors, including land, capital, labor. And so climate change is really showing that supply chains will need to be agile and really look inward for sources of supply to remain sort of, agile and on their feet and able to adjust to any punches that come their way. So these changes are really begin to compound and reshape global economic conditions. So new models are going to be needed if companies want to retain their supply chain decision-making and flexibility. One approach to do this would be creating a constellation of value with your suppliers and your networks. So supply chains are no longer these lateral formations that we're used to thinking of. Their importance and complexity has formed them into multidimensional models consisting of numerous nodes, with each node being a critical point in the supply chain, whether it be a customer, a supplier, a warehousing, or logistics partner. And what DSCI does is work with their members to create the right constellation for their business that has the agility and flexibility that traditional supply chains lack. So what is a constellation of value? It's a 3D mapping of critical supply chain operational nodes selected from a galaxy of possible partnering options. It's designed to evolve based on the customer's needs and put the customer needs first. So it's a hand-selected and intentionally designed network built to increase the security and the visibility and the agility of the supply chain. It often requires complex negotiations and value relationships and data sharing inside the constellation to work successfully and effectively and create that competitive advantage. So it really relies heavily on trust within the members. And once these advanced networks are developed, it resembles a bit more of a constellation than typically that flat supply chain we're used to thinking of. So how is a constellation created? This is done by flipping the back end of the supply chain to the front end, or completing what we refer to as a front side flip. The front side flips create a customer present supply chain and meet the new customers' demands, who have sort of evolving expectations on what companies need to provide to remain both a happy and loyal repeat customer. Constellations of value require much more data sharing than traditional supply chains, and they reduce functional silos. So functions such as demand and sales planning needs to be seamlessly linked to the supply chain to enable the best decision making possible. And this connection between the front and back end and reduction of silos is what enables you to serve the new customer's needs better and sort of creates that competitive advantage. So data sharing really needs to be enabled between certain nodes and connections of the constellation to really see success. And so there's a lot of value that's created within a constellation of value between your members, which are supply chain business intelligence, enablers, and customers. So everyone involved will see a variety of benefits that include sort of the data sharing. So the data sharing enables both parties to fill any potential gaps they may be seeing in their supply chain and create this competitive advantage. So when using contracts and building these relationships, you're establishing a safe space within your grouping or your constellation. And it lets you know where your data is going, how it's being used, and how it's benefiting every party involved. This enables you to sort of create an environment where you can sort of test and try different solutions that your constellation members may have without really requiring as large of a financial commitment. So the focus of these is to really develop trust between the members and create this environment where you can test and try different solutions. Marco, do you think I'm missing anything here before we move forward?
One thing which is important to link everything is that the relationship in between the nodes or in between the partners and suppliers, as Sarah mentioned, today is engaging on both ends. So it's a two-way street. Supply chain is not anymore just a back-end function, working in order to fulfill the promise towards the customer, but it's actually an active function which is leading the network of partners and suppliers towards the needs of the customer. So instead of pushing from the supply chain towards customer, now it's more a pull from the customer towards supply chain. So that brought the complexity, which the successful organization overcome with the right constellation of value, meaning that the partners and suppliers are not just anymore found in a sense of finding only the best price, but it's also the capabilities and the expertise or the excellence which the partner or supplier can bring in their part of the value chain. So the active promise towards the customer should be fulfilled. So in that sense, you can see constellation of value as ever evolving system in which there is trust, and also there is investment by everybody in building their own individual excellence. Sarah, back to you.
Okay. Well, that's everything that I had on this topic. If anyone has any questions or specific questions before we sort of dive into the next segment of the webinar. Okay. I'll hand it back over to you, Juan, then.
Hi, thanks, Sarah, and thanks, Mark. Now, look, I I completely agree, right? We do live in kind of a new reality. Global supply chains have drastically changed, especially over the past 3 to 4 years. I think what's been particularly disruptive is essentially those changes that the pandemic brought with, and the rise that you talk about, kind of deglobalization and protectionism and some politics globally are also starting to cause a big effect, right? So it's good to see and to kind of understand how the reorganization of these supply chains into constellations of value can help navigate some of those disruptions, right? So I'll get us started with our panel discussion. I see there's already a couple of questions on queue. I've got a couple of ones that I want to throw out first, and then I'll start addressing some of the audience questions. But yeah, so maybe Marco, I'll start with you in the questions, and the first one would be, look, how do you perceive the impact of these geopolitical factors on an enterprise supply chain? And in addition to that, then what measures can these businesses take to mitigate the potential risks?
So it's really a great question, and I thank for it. It's very mindful. I think in today's world, as they call it, this might be one of those $1 million questions. I think in this area, there's no one size fits all. But to try to really come from what we learned on the ground, what has been mostly successful is that people understood how they can organize their nodes in the constellation of value. Now, coming to a practical aspect, what does it mean? It means that you have, especially if you're a global enterprise, you have a way to leverage with the different geographies where you can play in fulfilling your from the first mile to the last mile, from the first mile and manufacturing towards the distribution center. And in that sense, the key activities which we have seen were related to creating a new strategy on already 3 known things. That's the way of where you organize the key important pieces of your supply chain in a sense of strategy for offshoring, nearshoring, and onshoring. So if you are dealing with goods, people would be reorganizing it, because so far mostly the things related to supply chain and manufacturing were offshore, right? Far away, in the different continent. Now, what changed was that people now just reorganize the percentages, meaning that, the offshoring is not in such a high percent anymore. Of course, it requires time and investment, but it's not only now time and investment by the enterprise. The new partnerships are created in that aspect. So the parts of the supply chain system can be more important and more, more reliable going forward, especially in the geographies of interest based on the things which Sarah shared for the geopolitical scene, which we see changing. What we have seen is that mostly now things are shifting to nearshoring. So that would be, seeing U.S. and Mexico, how that relationship, for instance, is developing as a practical case. In Europe, especially countries which are in Central Europe, serving towards the western side of Europe, right? What is the role of Middle East as well, playing there towards EMEA? And what is the role of Africa going forward, and especially Southeast Asia? This is where we see the biggest shifts towards, nearshoring partnerships. And then last but not the least, the onshoring, the investments in the respected country where you need the delivery of the good or service. It doesn't need to be just linked to the headquarters. This is what started rising. Now, again, it started going in 2 directions. One direction is greenfield directly for the enterprise, depending on the enterprise strategy. But what we see more is, again, meaningful partnerships with the companies who have been long-term partners or suppliers, who can create a JV or something which is a structural enterprise which will serve a specific field for the respected big market, and maybe potentially as well for the surroundings as a region. So this is what we are seeing, going forward.
Yeah, no. I think that's really helpful, and clearly technology has a big influence in this, right? Because you still have, again, now you've got a larger network. Now you've got your constellation of value. your offshoring combined with your nearshoring and your onshoring, and then the complexity on data sharing, on visibility, and maintaining everything rolling is huge, right? And I think by now we kind of know and we understand the huge opportunity that technology can be to, or how it can impact supply chains. But something that often gets overlooked is the challenges on implementing this new technology and what that can bring. So, Sarah, maybe I'll ask you the next question, which is, again, in your opinion, what are some of those key challenges and opportunities that lay at the intersection between technology and business, particularly in the context of today, right? Discussing that global economy and that constellation of supply chain. How can also businesses navigate these challenges, and how can they leverage these opportunities for growth?
Yeah, sure. I think what makes part of this so difficult is that it's so rapidly evolving. You know, the technology is changing every single day. I mean, I know DSCI is beginning to focus a lot on AI in supply chain. And just for example, I mean, there's so much new information. It's sort of, you know, like, where do we even start? How will this impact us in the future? You know, what changes do we want to make to, you know, sort of stay on the cutting edge, stay on our toes, and benefit our supply chain? So I think that's part of what makes this issue so complex, sort of, and sort of a gray area is sort of, where do you start from there? So I think that really adds a level of complexity to the issue.
Yeah. And how do you think then industry leaders, then they should balance at the end these challenges and these opportunities before on implementing the technology, right? It's like, as you said, you've got a huge wave of AI. There's a lot of other digital technologies that can create a lot of value, but then they need to figure out, okay, where to start, as you say, right. It's a big part of the question, but should that refrain them from rolling out these initiatives, or should they be kind of more proactive and take on a little bit more risk and say, let's roll out an implementation, because the business opportunity that this can bring is much higher than the risks that are associated with implementation.
Sure. I think that's sort of the benefit of creating a constellation of value and having these nodes, so you can have sort of a, you know, one of your nodes can be sort of a reliable fallback, while you can also try to test out sort of new things in another branch and sort of implement sort of slowly. So I think that's kind of the benefit of a well-constructed constellation of value, is it lets you sort of test and try new things, you know, with AI or whatever new technology may be, while having a reliable source of supply still coming in.
That's a good point. And you can also kind of test run it against it, right? It'd be an easier way to measure that business case. Okay, I'm running in my traditional way and I'm trying this new technology. How has that improved these channels? But yeah, that's a good point. I would like us to kind of zone in digital, right? Because again, digital transformation has been in the top of the basic corporate agenda and a big boardroom topic for years now. That accelerated because of the pandemic, but we've had a pretty strange 2023 so far, I think, right? So again, everyone kind of started preparing for that potential recession, and that completely changed the strategies that were coming from these boardrooms, right? So now everyone was kind of more focused around, okay, let's make sure that we've got a resilient business in the short term, and perhaps put a hold on some longer term bets, right? So I think things are now different. Again, it's been a strange year, but a lot has continued to move. And the recent moves by the Fed in the US and by central banks in Europe, they have started to minimize that likelihood of a recession. But I would still kind of like to take your view, Marco. Perhaps I'll start with you, right? On the role of digital transformation, the role that they play in business strategy. Is that different today than it was a year or two ago?
So, Juan, thank you for the question. I think today nobody can say they will stay ignorant to it. And it's not because of the strategies of the organization. And it's not related to, are you in traditional industry or not, or are you a digital native company or not. It's because of the notion of the new customer, as we would like to say in DSCI. And what does it mean is that the customers today are fully digital, especially after COVID, right? After we had these, 2 crazy years, everything went on, like connected web. So even one thing which we found, which was never happening before, is that the expectations of the customer, which is B2C, and the expectations of the customer in B2B became completely similar. Why? Because, during the pandemic and the time when we all work from home, most of the people have been doing parallelly 2 things, running their lives digitally and then running their role within the organization digitally. So you can imagine yourself, ordering on Amazon on one side, for your home, and then also negotiating a contract and the delivery within supply chain, which is business to business with your partner. So these expectations fling, not because of the evolution of technology, but because of the circumstances we lived in. Now, fast forward where we are today is because of the customer expectations and the front side flip, which Sarah shared, right? Everything starts now from the customer. So that means that it's inevitable for you, if you would like to give a good service in supply chain, that you need to digitize your operation. That doesn't mean that you need to use RPA or things like that, or try to reinvent the wheel. It's all about what both of you mentioned, Juan and Sarah, the way of how you can exchange the data within your network, within your constellation. Because now we are generating that data on every touch point. And if we don't utilize, if we don't segregate, and if we don't use it for the excellence in service towards our customers, we won't be having loyal and happy customers. So that's where basically the technology plays the role. Having in mind as well the 3 elements which Sarah shared. I can start, bottom up from, the side of, for instance, ESG and commitment towards the environment. There's so much information gathered within supply chain from first to the last mile, where you need to organize your data. And the only way how you can do it in order to have the right reporting is to connect your data with your network. So doing that, you cannot do with papers, you cannot do with phone calls, you cannot do in a traditional way. You need to have an integrated system across the board. So that's why this is going forward. Now, of course, it's very hard because we have a very short time frame to get everybody on board, and not everybody is on the same level of maturity. And what we have seen as a practical benefit for everyone is that if you have a trusted constellation, as Sarah shared, that's like, imagine it as a secure and safe ecosystem where you can take with those who are less mature certain small proof of value projects which can happen on a sample. So if we are talking about ESG, which is a very important thing, right? You take a segment of the information and data, you use the, like, let's say the trusted digital channel of one of the partners who is matured, and you start testing it. You don't roll out everything and then, get stuck as it was done before. And then, a million consultants come in and then the hours piling up and nothing happens, right? But you take a small segment, you test it together, you integrate, you build the knowledge of your partner as well, and then you roll it out. And this is what we see really as a great success. And I'll underline one thing, we don't live in Disneyland. We have seen so many successes, but we've seen failures. But what happened with the failures? If it's a small segment you are testing, if it's a trusted network, the learnings spread across the board. So there's no failure. Basically, there are learnings. And then everybody pivots, readjusts, and see how the digital channel can be improved, or is there another solution that can be tested? And that moves the process much quicker. It builds as well the trust, and also it builds the expertise and the level of value of how you can select the digital channels which works for everyone.
Yeah, no, I think it very much on point, and it kind of fits with what Sarah was telling us, right? This is a way to minimize the risk on trying out some of these new initiatives, right? So I'll use this as a segue to do my 20-second ad, basically, because this type of essentially traceability, data sharing, and shared record keeping solutions, that's what we at Finboot specialized on, and that's what we've helped clients across industrial segments implement, right? And in our experience, just like you're saying, Marco, the path towards a successful ecosystem is very much progressive, right? So it's a stepping stone approach. You need to start with a limited number of partners and then progressively grow and scale that up, right? And with this, again, as you say, success is not 100% guarantee, but the chances of a successful and a risk-free or minimized risk implementation are much higher, right? So I think that's great. I think we can kind of go over and start addressing some of the questions from the audience. I see 2 questions here, but again, everyone that's watching, I encourage you. You can leave some of those in the comment section, and we'll be able to address them. So the first one comes from LinkedIn, from Julieta. She asks, what is the main driver for urgency for a business to introduce new technology to address the supply chain challenges? Is this something they are proactively addressing or simply closely monitoring? I'll take both of your opinion on this while we get the audience more excited to ask more questions. And so, Sarah?
Sure. Well, thank you, Julieta. This is a great question. I would say the main, well, unfortunately, I kind of think the main driver for urgency sort of depends on your industry and what you're focusing on, which I know probably is not the answer that she's looking for, but I think it just sort of, depends on the industry and your customer base and sort of, the geographical region that you're in, as it depends on what policies are being implemented in your area or what, physical effects that you are seeing on your supply chain.
Yeah, I think definitely policy is becoming more of a driver, right? And you mentioned some of those changes, Sarah, that I think are changing the way people are reacting to these challenges. Marco, anything you want to add there?
I will try to be brief so we can answer as well the other question. But Julieta, thank you very much for the first question. What drives the urgency? I will underline customer, right? Customers are driving the value for everyone in the value chain. They're the ones pushing the agenda, and that's where the urgency is. The second question is as well very important, proactive or rather closely monitoring. I think there we can divide the world into two components. Digital native companies are all around it, right? They are proactive. They are all around the place. They understand the ecosystem. They understand the need of the customer. But maybe what they don't understand and they don't see as far as we go forward is traditional industries. So you cannot just, put a glue of a software on a traditional industry without understanding the processes and the complexity of it, right? So that brings us to this, who are monitoring, mostly the traditional industries. But what we see now, where is the shift? The biggest shift is happening maybe behind the scenes in a way. And that's the shift of the generations of leaders which are coming. Because the leaders which are coming in traditional businesses, today, and which will be coming in next 3 to 4 years, are digitally native people. They are also changing the agenda. That's why we in DSCI see and firmly believe that the new way of change management needs to be adopted. The change management, which is not anymore at all, top down, but actually is, we cannot call it even a bottom up, but it's actually based on exactly what you asked, on a proactive approach towards a resolution for the customer needs, which requires either innovation in the way of how you approach things, or you deliver your product or a service, innovation of a process, or innovation in a way of how you will prepare your workforce and teams in order to have the excellency service. Juan, back to you.
Thank you, Nat. We've got another question on data sharing. So how is it going to be standardized in order to find common interest in this strategy? Marco?
So it's a super important question. And I would like to thank anybody who asked it. And we have created a tool after wandering around, through the whole idea. We didn't have the idea and the solution at the very beginning. We knew that the data should be segregated and then also shared. But of course, you cannot share everything, right? So what we learned actually is, you need to have a data sharing policy. That policy usually works at the very beginning where you are building the value within your constellation of value, is that once you segregate your data, you understand what is the data for you, which is of low value for you, and then what is the high value. High value you keep on the side and you see for the stage 2, stage 3. Low value you can share immediately, and it won't, under quotes, cost you anything. Now, if you have an open conversation within, the constellation of value, I'll give you an example with, one of our members who is in apparel, right? They analyzed their data and they understood that certain things related to seasonality, color, and then linkage towards the sex of the users is something which they always have, but it's a low value for them, right? One of their retail partners was craving for this information. They didn't know, right? We asked the retail partner, like, what is low value data when they segregated data, when they did the exercise? Like, what is low value for you? And what they were saying was, the sex of the people who are buying those products, and then the size, right? So linking the size with the sex on the seasonality was very, very important, for the basically apparel company. So having two companies which collaborate together, who can exchange this information, and they didn't do it only because they didn't communicate about it. Once they unlock it, everything went 30% up for every single individual customer, which brought both sides, better revenues, better customer satisfaction, better seasonality value. So I'm just giving you one of the practical examples, but it can happen in any industry on any level of information. But what you need to do first is to segregate yours, understand what is of low value, immediately open up and say, those are the elements we have and we share, and then ask for what you need.
Got it. So we are coming to the end, but I will pick up the last questions from the audience, Sarah. So if you can provide a quick answer to that. I'll summarize a little bit from what I've read, right? So Jack says, we had the three factors, so deglobalization, protectionism, and climate commitment to climate change. And he says there seem to be two boxes, right? And I think on your remarks, you mentioned that the IMF also said, right, deglobalization and protectionism can hinder innovation, and that's going to hurt us with climate action. So are these two competing elements? Are businesses prioritizing one or the other, or can we actually address them jointly?
Yeah, no, this is a great question. And I think, unfortunately, the effects of these three factors do sort of compound off one another. So it does sort of make it difficult for companies to choose sort of, where do we start and what do we focus on? But I would say that depends on sort of your customer base and how, what you feel will impact them the most would be sort of the area to start and sort of look at. And I know that, they all sort of impact each other, and, the policy changes will impact everything and your supply chain will shift. But I think it depends on your customer base and how you can sort of mitigate these changes while still fulfilling the customer needs to the best of your ability.
Yeah, I think, and it goes back to what Marco says, right? It's customer, right? So I think it's the customer who will decide which one of these three challenges is king in a way, right? So again, there's a little bit more of activity, but we are kind of at the top of our time today. I want to thank Sarah, Marco, and everyone at the DSCI team. Again, I also want to thank everyone who tuned in. Remember, you can download the full paper. The link is in the comments section. You can also come back to this event, as it will be on demand on LinkedIn and YouTube, and you can share with your peers if you found the insights of today interesting. Finally, I'll also say that if you're interested to know more about what we do at Finboot, our activity, how we are helping our clients with their traceability and supply chain challenges, please reach out to our team. You can book an intro meeting or a demo in the link that's going to be shared on the comment section as well. And in any case, through email, those who sign up via email, they will receive the same option after the event. Lastly, make sure you follow us and DSCI on LinkedIn to stay tuned for kind of future updates and future events. Thank you, everyone, once more. And that's it for today. Until next time.
Thank you very much, Juan.
You.
Thank you, Finboot, and thank everybody for joining us and for really insightful questions. I think the global supply chain transformation really depends on every single individual, who is contributing her or his time. into it. So we are all, as DSCI, grateful to every single individual who has an interest and who takes the action.
Absolutely. Thanks, Marco. All right. Cheers, everyone.
Thank you.